So today I'm going to do a brief video tutorial covering the very simple technique of adding scratches, grain, dirt, and other textures over an image in Photoshop to create a distressed and time-worn look. This would be appropriate for any kind of retro or old school poster, and certainly for anything piratey or Middle Ages, high fantasy, and so on. So I started with this poster that I had done for a previous project. I made sure to name my layer something reasonable, so let's call it poster image. Then I went to textures.com where I have a free account, searched for paper texture, and found one that looked about right. On textures.com you can download many free textures at 1040 by 1600, and that's more than enough for on-screen display. Alternatively, of course, you can just get out your phone, go outside, and take some straight-on photos of dirt, cracked concrete, old newspaper or packaging, and that will work just fine as well. You're probably going to want to do that on a slightly overcast day, as the lighting will be low contrast and neutral. I then searched for cracked concrete and found another suitable texture. You generally want a fairly even distribution of details, with no overly dramatic cracks and certainly no writing or recognizable marks of any kind. You want to be able to flip or rotate and still have the texture work just fine. So I brought my two textures into Adobe Photoshop, named them Texture 1 and Texture 2, and hid Texture 2 while dealing with Texture 1. When using imported textures, I will almost always open Image, Adjustments, Hue, Saturation, and reduce the saturation to 0, meaning it's now black and white. I don't want any colors, even subtle tints, interfering with what should be a subtle texture effect. I don't want it to change the original color scheme. So now I've got my two texture layers, and when I open my blending options in the layers window, I will generally just slowly scroll down the list, hovering over each option until I find the general look I want. In this case, I've used overlay. Also, I don't want my poster to look like it spent the last 20 years in a landfill, so much as hanging on the wall of a coffee shop. So I reduce the opacity of the layer to 50%. Now I turn layer 2 back on, and I do the same. Blending mode is overlay, opacity is 50%. Now that's looking pretty good, but there's two things I don't quite like about the way this texture is being applied. The vignette effect that's happening in the top left corner looks great, but it's not happening on the other side of the image. It's a bit too distressed in the middle as well. I don't want to undermine the visual impact of my central image quite this much. So I duplicate Texture 2 and renamed it Texture 3. I go to Edit, Transform, Flip Horizontal. Now the darker distressed edge is happening evenly from both the left and right margins of the page, and that solves my first problem. But what about reducing the opacity of the image just in the middle? For that, I hide Texture 3 and select Texture 2. I go down to the bottom of the Layers window and I select the Add Vector Mask button to create a mask, and as you can see, it's completely white, meaning it's not actually masking anything out. Now I go over to my Tools palette. I select the paintbrush. I make sure that it's painting in 100% black, and I make it larger, in this case 417 pixels, and I reduce the opacity to 50% because I want to be able to gradually reduce the opacity of the middle. If I overdo it in one shot, I'm stuck, and I need to delete and start again. It's always better to reduce or build up gradually and stop when things look right. Now I want to apply this exact vector mask to Texture 3, so I make Texture 3 visible again, and I select it. I hover over the vector mask in Texture 2 and press Ctrl left mouse button to select it. As you can see, I now have a selection path on the mask itself. I press the vector mask button again, and voila, I have duplicated the mask on Texture 2 onto Texture 3. My red rocket, moon, and text is nice and bright. My edges are damaged and dark, and I think I've approximated a weathered and distressed retro poster look pretty successfully. If you have any questions about this, feel free to ask on Microsoft Teams. And if you're curious about any other technique in Photoshop or Illustrator for your Assignment 2 project, let me know, and I might make a video about it. Thanks a lot, and good luck.